So it's the early 1900s and you're one of the most powerful US senators named Nelson Aldrich, and you and every other career politician are in a bit of a pickle. A pickle that has plagued government since the advent of government. You want more money from the subjects you rule over because, do I even have to explain it? Obviously, you know how to spend their money better than they do. Their money is just better off in your nobler hands. Duh. Another reason why you want more money is for times of crisis when everyone was too irresponsible to prepare. When everyone is panicking, they'll instinctually look to you, the government, for help.
We need a lot more action by the federal government.
It is almost certain that Congress will be called upon once again to provide more relief.
We need big, bold, expensive action from the government.
Now, whether or not you believe that the government should help them in times of crisis is irrelevant, because if you don't offer any welfare, if you don't bail them out, they'll blame you and throw you out of office. But if you had a ton of money on your hands, however, you'll have the ability to give them some, not welfare, that sounds too low class, some stimulus. Yes, stimulus, some grants to keep the peace, but most importantly, to come off as their savior. The main way to take money from your subjects is through taxes. The problem with that is that if you tax people too much, they'll go all up in arms and also throw you out of office, because who wants to pay higher taxes? So we need a sneakier way to tax our subjects to extract the money that we rightfully deserve without them ever even realizing it. Enter printing money. If you could print money, you get the same result as taxing. More purchasing power for you, the government, to spend, and since there's more money in circulation, less purchasing power in the bank accounts of your plebs. Except when you print money, since you're not directly taking money from your servants and instead decreasing the value of the money they already have in their bank accounts, they'll be too stupid to catch on. While little do they realize that in the end, you end up with the same amount of money you would have gotten from taxes in the first place, and they end up with less value in their bank accounts. But since the number in their bank account doesn't change, they'll never catch on and you're in the clear. A much sneakier and smarter way to tax. But now you've got another problem. The idea of the government just having free reign to print as much money as they want whenever they want just doesn't sound right. It rubs people the wrong way and conjures up images of Germans loading up wheelbarrows of money to buy a loaf of bread, as they should, being that nearly every society that has freely printed money in the past eventually collapsed their currency and fell into economic turmoil. Well, gee, if only there was a way for you to get all the same benefits of printing money without tipping off the populace to your scheme. Enter the Federal Reserve, America's money printer. Get 2 free stocks valued up to $1,400 with today's video sponsor, the free trading app Webull, when you open an account and deposit at least $100 with the link below. By 1907, other politicians and bankers alike have tried to create a money printing machine in the US before, also known as a central bank, but all 3 attempts failed miserably. This left a sour taste for central banking in the eyes of the US population. They just didn't really trust them. But something magical happened that year that would forever change the course of history. The stock market dropped almost 50%. People were running to withdraw their money from banks, which led to a ton of banks and businesses declaring bankruptcy, which later became known as the Panic of 1907. Now, you being the very prominent Senator Nelson Aldrich know that it's criminal to ever let a crisis like this go to waste. People were panicking, they lost confidence in the financial system and in banks, and were demanding that something, just something, be done to prevent this from happening again. This is the perfect opportunity to use this crisis as an excuse to give the money printing machine another shot in the US and reap all the benefits from it. So what do? On a cold winter night in 1910, you board your private train car along with a few of your guests to travel to a luxury vacation spot in Georgia called JEKYLL Island, while telling the public that, we're just going on a duck hunt, when really, you and your friends are going to plot out your money printing ambitions. You and your 5 guests end up representing 1/4 of the world's wealth. The Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, the heads of the most powerful banks at the time, National City Bank of New York, JP Morgan, and Kuhn Loeb and Company, and of course you, Nelson Aldrich. But if the public caught wind that the heads of government and big banks were colluding together to build a central bank, they would never buy it. It would never pass Congress. So you had your guests arrive separately with very specific instructions to make sure that their identities and the purpose of your journey wouldn't leak out to the public. Along Along with the politicians of the time, these big banker friends of yours were also in a bit of a pickle. As a big banker, small banks were popping up all over the American frontier, which meant that you, the big banks in New York, were losing all of your market share to pesky competition. Since you make the bulk of your money from giving out loans and collecting interest rates at the time were set pretty reasonably by the free market, not too low, not too high. So only serious people took out loans, which meant less profit for you. So you needed a way to lower interest rates at your whim so more people would borrow and pay you more interest. And lastly, to make more money as a bank, you had to be more risky and lend out more of your depositors' money. But as we saw with the bank runs of the Panic of 1907, if you were too risky, you didn't have the luxury of government bailouts that we have today. So you need something where you're able to shift your losses onto the taxpayer to always be bailed out. And it's this common pain point of wanting to control both banks and the money supply that brought the heads of government and big banks together. And within just a couple years of that fateful meeting at JEKYLL Island, the Federal Reserve System was born. Shortly after the bill was signed into law, this is what you had to say. Before passage of this act, the New York bankers could only dominate the reserves of New York. Now we're able to dominate the bank reserves of the entire country. Now you had to be pretty clever to get it to pass Congress. Remember, the approval of the public is the key to whatever your heart desires. And to get the public's approval for your central bank, you had to frame it as in the public's best interest, that this will stabilize the economy, that this is the key to making sure that nothing like the terrible crash of 1907 will ever happen again. Since Americans weren't a fan of central banks at the time, you definitely couldn't outright call it a central bank, so you needed something vague. The Federal Reserve? That works. But even with the deceptive name, if it was just one single government-run bank, it would look too much like a central bank. So instead of one central bank, you make it look decentralized with 12 regional Federal Reserve banks. But then have a board of governors ruling over all of them anyways. And then boom, with just a few coats of lipstick on the pig, America's third money printing machine is born. And here's how it works. Printing money is like a magic trick. You make something out of nothing, but you can't just simply turn on the printing press and say, hey, we're gonna print $2 trillion today. No. You have to redirect the public's attention by calling it something more technical, by making the process more complicated, so that the common man won't be able to make heads or tails of what you're talking about. Call it using the discount window, open market operations, changing the reserve ratio, quantitative easing, basically anything that doesn't allude to, hey, we're printing money and making your money less valuable. Out of all these different methods the Federal Reserve uses to control the amount of money in the money supply, open market operations is by far the most powerful tool. But fair warning, this is gonna get a little convoluted, a little confusing. But remember, that's the point. But if you stick through this with me, I promise you that I will turn you into a money printing magician. And it all starts with step number 1, government debt. Government debt is the purpose of this entire scheme. You, the government, need an infinite amount of money to spend on whatever you deem necessary, so the government takes out loans in the form of treasury notes or bonds, literally a piece of paper that people pay for that says the government will pay you back this loan plus interest in the future. As we're about to see, this debt forms the foundation for nearly all of the nation's money supply. This is also where that sleight of hand magic comes in. What you, the government, just did by taking out these loans was practically create cash, but it doesn't look like it yet. That will come in the next steps thanks to our shiny new Federal Reserve System. Step number 2, you, the government, then sells that treasury note or bond to average citizens. This could be big or small banks that buy these securities, businesses, or ordinary citizens. And when the Fed wants to turn on the printing press, they'll simply buy these treasury notes or bonds from the banks, businesses, and people that bought them. But they'll usually only buy from the major banking firms though. But here's the thing, the Fed doesn't have any money on hand to pay for these treasuries or bonds. So in return, the Fed pays in the form of new money that's created out of thin air on the spot. Since these sales happen on computers, there's usually no actual new paper money that's printed, only digits increasing on a computer, which makes our job a lot easier. But it doesn't stop there. See, banks don't have to keep all the money you deposit on hand. They can lend out the majority of your money to collect interest on. Being that collecting interest on loans is the main way banks make money, if they don't lend out the money you deposit, they lose out on all that potential profits. So they're incentivized to loan out as much of your money as possible. This is called fractional reserve banking, and the Fed is responsible for setting that fraction of how much your deposits banks have to keep on hand, which ironically was just set to 0%. So the new money the Fed created out of thin air from the last step gets deposited into the banks that sold their treasury notes and bonds to the Fed. Those banks then lend out that money as loans to collect interest on. That loan out money will end up in other bank accounts, which will increase the reserves of those banks the bank accounts belong to, which will allow those banks to lend out even more loans. And the cycle of loaned out money ending up in other bank accounts to be loaned out again repeats, increasing the money supply. Which brings us to the end. Once you go through all these convoluted steps, the government took out debt, the Fed creates money for that debt, the government spent that debt, and once the money gets deposited into banks, the banks can then loan out that debt and collect interest on it. Once you've gone through all of that, you, sir, have just accomplished all the original goals we set after. You're able to print money out of thin air on command, the modern day equivalent of alchemy. All this newfound money lowers the purchasing power of the plebs you rule over, while you, the government, got the money that you rightfully deserve. Or in other words, you just successfully tax your subjects without them ever even realizing it. Now you can use your newfound money for your stimulus checks, to bail out the big banks that help you start this whole scheme, or whatever your heart desires. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy all that sweet, manipulated, devalued money.
That's fake money, though. That's not real money. That's fake money. That's $200 trillion of fake money.
Oh, you're really? I know. But it's all based on faith.
How long is it sustainable, though, to go at that pace?
But don't enjoy it too much, because even if you print a bunch of money for yourself, the printing won't stop. The genie has been let out of the bottle and your cash will just keep declining in purchasing power. So why not invest all that hard-earned cash into assets that appreciate over time instead of losing value? And a great way to start investing is with a free stock trading app like Webull that strikes the perfect balance between ease of use and having all the tools you need. They have a clean mobile app and a very comprehensive web browser app to make sure that you make the most out of your newly printed money. And for a limited time, Webull is giving you 2 free stocks. The first one when you open an account valued between $2.50 and $250, and another one valued between $12 all the way up to $1,400 if you deposit at least $100. So if you like free stuff and not super advertiser friendly videos like this, claim your 2 free stocks with the link below and support the brands that help make this channel possible. Whew. Guys, this one took a lot more work than usual. If you enjoyed this video essay and you think other people should see it, all I ask for you to do is just this one small little thing. Just go in the comments below and write "I watched to the end" to give the YouTube algorithm a nice boost. I would really appreciate it. Also, the comment section is getting pretty out of hand and I love it. If you're still watching this right now, you guys are my biggest supporters. I'm talking to you watching this video in quarantine right now. You guys are my biggest supporters and I really appreciate it. That is all I have for you guys for this video. Thank you so much for watching. You've been awesome.